Here we go. Oh, there. Ow. Walk backwards now. Push down.
Again, good morning, Timothy. Let
Good
me
morning,
get.
Maya. How are you doing?
I'm doing fine. How about you?
Great.
Great this morning.
It's a beautiful sunny day. It's not raining anymore.
No, it isn't, thankfully. Wow, thank you for being here once again this morning. This is the
I got
191st.
dressed up and I brushed my tooth for you.
Thank you very much for doing that. You look great indeed. So I cannot wait to hear what you can share with us about the Japanese politics, the events here, and I guess there are quite a few things once again going on. So
Yeah,
uh,
there's some things going on like tectonically that
uh-huh.
are really big and deep. So I'd like to get into that a little bit.
Yes, we have to, and I think that some of them are not in the news yet. So that's going to be also interesting to hear and to learn about those things in advance. So, okay, without any further ado, let's start. And we can
Okay.
continue. Just one thing that today we're going to continue the questions and answers on the live stream as well. So, Timothy will continue to sound through my microphone in Clubhouse. If you want, if you have questions, don't hesitate to share them with us at that point. That's it for the
Okay.
moment.
So
Yeah.
so in other words, we're going to continue rolling through on LinkedIn to include the Q&A portion as well. Usually we do the briefing for 30 minutes, then we stop and then we roll into Clubhouse exclusive Q&A. And today, for the first time, we're going to try and see how the audience reacts to keeping the Q&A on live stream, right?
Yes, exactly that. Thank you for making it clear.
Okay, and I have to point out that we have another person in the audience. I keep seeing this tail go by. Your
I'm sorry.
your
Yes,
cat is joining us.
she's listening very intently now.
Oh, good. Our
Yes,
audience has grown by
screen.
one.
Right.
So
Yes.
now we have an audience of 4. That's good. Hi, Mom.
Yeah. Say hello, Fukumi. Okay, here she is. Once again, she's
Kumi.
still very shy. Yeah. Great. Let's start.
Okay,
So,
great. Thank you. Good morning, everybody. Today is June 4th. Welcome to June. This is our 121st episode, Maya.
yes, it is. Thanks
Congratulations.
a lot.
And
Congratulations.
thank you to our audience, to everybody who's interested enough in Japanese politics to stick with us. You know, the audience continues to build. Every week we bring you information and insight into what's going on in Japanese politics that's important to you. And frequently, we actually are a week or 2 weeks ahead of the news. So really appreciate you staying tuned and also contributing by sticking with us for the Q&A session or by feeding Maya questions as the program progresses, so that it's richer and more insightful for you. So, without further ado, I'd like to get into it. There's a lot going on, as I said earlier, at a tectonic level. That means that within the LDP and Komeito, their coalition, it's beginning to show signs of tremendous strain. It looks like we are moving towards the possibility of a snap election. The prime minister fired his son as his secretary on Thursday. You might remember that Bunshun, which is the magazine that comes out every week, talking about political scandals, movie stars, people spending money that's not theirs, that sort of thing. It is an important part of understanding Japanese politics because Japanese media is somewhat controlled, and some of the stories just don't come out that should. And Bunshun provides that element of, what is not being reported, what's not polite to be reported. And so it does provide a pretty important role. You don't put a whole lot of weight on it because it is sometimes unsubstantiated. It's really fast and loose with the facts sometimes, but it is an element that one needs to be familiar with. And I follow it every week and bring that news to you. It was reported that the prime minister's son was having a dinner party, and they took pictures. People criticized the prime minister, so he ended up firing his son on Thursday. That magazine comes out on Thursday, by the way, so the timing is not too curious. But I'll get into that a little bit later. But let me just touch on some of the news that's going on now that's topical, that's important to you. The fertility rate, as everybody knows, in Japan has continued to fall. It's been falling for 20 years. The replacement rate is now at 1.26%. This is the 7th year of a precipitous decline, but it's been going on for 20 years. And it is encouraging the prime minister and business leaders and the entire government to once again be focused. They have been focused on it in the past, but now it seems to be something of a critical element. The prime minister has pulled together a team, and he has determined that he's going to put some money into it. So they had a big brouhaha on Thursday, and they said that we're going to fund. He had already said earlier, months earlier, that he's going to attack this problem at an unprecedented level. The declining birth rate is an existential threat to Japan. We need to encourage people to have more children. We need to support them. We need to give them more child rearing and government support for raising their children up into high school. So this is beginning to come to a head, and part of that coming to a head, it's not complete yet, because the meeting that they had yesterday was a very large meeting involving a lot of the ministries and the influential politicians who are in the fertility, the child birth rate, the education, the healthcare kind of ecosystem, met, and they decided that they're going to put annually, 3.5 trillion yen a year for the next 3 years into childcare services. So to put that into context, you might remember that Japan decided to increase its defense expenditure from 1% to 2% per year. And that means for the next 5 years, in order to reach that target, Japan needs to spend 4 trillion yen every year. So of that, the Japanese consumers will be paying 1%, 1 trillion of that 4 trillion every year. So taxes need to come up. They don't know how they're going to be getting that. The corporate taxes are going to be going up. But that's 4 trillion every year for defense spending. For child rearing, it's going to be almost as much as going from 1% to 2% is going to cost the country. So that's a lot of money. That is unprecedented. The problem here, and the reason why it hasn't come to a complete head, is because the prime minister dodged the issue of how it's going to be paid, how the government is going to produce another 3.5 trillion on top of the 4 trillion for defense spending. So he received a lot of criticism for, once again, being big on words and vision, but low on how it's going to be paid. That's a kind of a signature mark of Mr. Kishida, unfortunately for him, but I think it is a political necessity. He is confronting the possibility of having a snap election very soon. We are in a diet session now, the 155th diet session. It ends on June 21st. Today is the 4th. It ends this month on the 21st. And there's speculation that maybe towards the end of the term, he might call a snap election. So that explains why when there was a little bit of a brouhaha, and I'll talk about it in more detail later about his son, he fired him pretty quickly. And people are concerned about the birth rate. And so he had a big meeting about that, but he's not putting the bitterness of how it's going to be paid for later, because he's trying to have all flowers and nice scents, so that the population is inclined to vote for him, to vote for the LDP, should there be a snap election. So looking at these little components guides you into understanding what the dynamics are, what he's weighing, and will he call for a snap election. So we'll dive into that a little bit better. But the funding plan, 3.5 trillion per year for the next 3 years. How is he going to do that? How is it going to be paid for? Japan, South Korea relationships. The relationship there is beginning to flourish a little bit more. You might remember that Mr. Kishida, as the leader of the G7, invited President Yoon to come to the G7 to participate in that. The olive branch has been extended. He visited South Korea. He visited the memorial to those victims, South Korean victims, those Korean victims who were killed in the atomic bomb of Hiroshima. They visited together as a pair. The United States and Japan and Korea are building this coalition so that there is an alliance, especially on military matters, so that they can share information, particularly with regard to rocket telemetry and what's going on in North Korea with the firing of the rockets. There was another rocket that was fired on Wednesday. It was anticipated. We've been kind of toying with the idea of when that will happen. I thought it might be more towards G7 to shake up the G7 leaders who were all here. It was pushed off a week, and that test, it wasn't a test actually, it was the launch of a spy satellite. And for this particular satellite, usually when they fire the rocket from North Korea, it goes towards Hokkaido, towards northern Japan. This one went towards Okinawa to reach a kind of stationary orbit in that direction. So when that rocket was fired, immediately they calculated what the trajectory is, and they thought it might be aiming towards Okinawa. So Okinawa had a bit of a scare. They had an alarm going off. People were put on high alert because the rocket was in air, but it failed before it actually left the too far off the coast. So that's a failed rocket for North Korea. But North Korea has said we are going to fire another one as soon as possible. So it's not through just because we failed on this one. We've learned some lessons from that. But also as this development was becoming more and more perceived by the United States, Japan, and South Korea, the Japanese Diet was considering a shoot down order in the event something like this happens. That conversation was going on Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday. The rocket was fired on Wednesday. It failed in mid-flight. Who knows if it was stopped one way or the other by Japan or the United States or some sort of coalition of forces to do that. That's undetermined. But they were talking about doing that. And I think maybe the strategy for Japan and the United States is let's just not let it develop too much further. If they are firing these rockets, we need to get them in mid-flight and not let this development continue, because it is a very worrying concern. Japan has been asked to provide explosive materials, specifically TNT, to the United States so that it can export that to Ukraine. It's a big deal because it's an explosive that is going to be used in mortar shells, artillery shells that the United States needs more supply of to supply to Ukraine. And apparently, there's a lot of artillery, there's a lot of mortars being used in this confrontation, maybe with tank battles and just preparing or defending on incursions by opposite forces. There's a lot of artillery that's being used. Apparently, they're running out of the explosives, and they want to source some of that from Japan. Here's the rub, though, that Article 9 prevents Japan from providing military grade, military use products for export. So under the request of the United States, Japanese government is being asked, can you please put together a package of TNT that we can export to use to pack these military devices? It scratches up against Article 9. So once again, it's I think the Japanese government, the Kishida administration, the Abe administration, and the Suga administration before him all want and acknowledge that Article 9 needs to be revised, especially given the geopolitics, and it's more important now than ever. So this rubbing up against Article 9 and the stipulations, dual use, military hardware, export of potential military useful products. I mean, Panasonic and Sony can create devices that have dual use capabilities on the battlefield, but they also have commercial use. So there is some leeway in the application of this this demand by Article 9. It's being toyed with a little bit. So the TNT is one issue, but once again, Japan is more drawn into the conflict as a participant. And, when retributions come out, the victors always want to get retribution for the people who supported or collaborated. And so this draws Japan further into this a group of like-minded countries. And I don't know if they are being pulled in as much as they want to, but it seems like this slow march towards the revision of the Constitution continues. That's why this snap election, or the possibility of having an election, having the LDP growing its influence within the Diet, because it needs 2/3 in the upper house, it needs 2/3 in the lower house, whether alone or in a coalition. So it's in a coalition government with Komeito, as everybody knows, but it doesn't have 2/3 in the lower house. It has 2/3 in the upper house. And in order to change the Constitution, you need 2/3 to approve it in both houses. And they're not there yet. And so as these developments occur militarily and geopolitically, the decision of having a snap election, are we going to win more? Are we going to end up with fewer votes than we started with, or fewer seats? It's a huge calculation, because geopolitically and also constitutionally, it makes a big difference. The referendum for changing the Constitution, and as we've discussed many times before, if they do revise the Constitution, it's not just Article 9, and maybe even they don't revise Article 9 on the first go. They might have 2/3. They decide on language to promote to the Japanese population on revising the Constitution the first time since its inception at the end of World War II, for it to be revised. Revise it once, and then once that cast has been cracked, then go at it a little bit more aggressively. But I think probably it's just going to require some sort of event, either from North Korea or from China or from maybe Russia, coming from the north, or Sakhalin, some sort of incident where self-defense forces are killed or injured, or Japan is unwarily drawn into a physical conflict. That might change things rather quickly, and a referendum can be held in pretty quick order. So we're going to continue to watch that and report on it to you. In light of this, Secretary of Defense Lloyd Austin was in Tokyo just this last week, Thursday and Friday. It's not a secret that he's here, but it did kind of sneak up on me. I had no inkling that he was going to be in town, but when the Secretary of Defense comes through, it's usually a pretty big deal. It was only reported after the fact, but he met with his counterpart and also with the Prime Minister, talking about a lot of things that are going on. In addition, while he was here, the report on the North Korea spy satellite. So there is a lot going on there. The relationship between South Korea and Japan is beginning to flourish. They had a meeting and a coalition. It's not quite an agreement yet on chip production, advanced chip production. And it seems that for South Korea, their largest trading partner on advanced chips is China. And if they're a member of this coalition of like-minded countries, they are required to reduce their trading with Russia, obviously, but also this tension that's continuing to grow on with China too. Similarly, Japan is having a real trouble because China imports a lot of the devices and the machinery that makes chips. It is their biggest source of revenue, actually, and they're being encouraged to cut that off and to make sure that if China takes over Taiwan, where TSMC is building, it's the largest manufacturer of advanced components, probably holds 80 or 90% of the production value there, to move that to the United States and to Japan, which is in mid-process now. Most of that takes 10 years or so to build the factories, but Korea needs to get on that as well. They've decided to actually invest in Japan, which is another hallmark of the relationship that's beginning to build, not just politically, but also economically and commercially, between South Korea and Japan. It is a very good development, that the countries are working more closely, more collaboratively together, it's not particularly a good sign that the future holds, great prospects of peace and prosperity. But it's just something that we need to watch, and it's one of those indicia of what's to come that we need to be careful of. I think the South Koreans have decided to spend about $215 million. That's about 30 billion yen on a chip manufacture and research and development system here in Japan, and it's probably going to be in Kumamoto. There's a lot going on there. So they've kind of signed off on that. So this collaboration is really good, very hopeful, I guess. In different news, the United States doesn't have formal diplomatic relationships with Taiwan. Instead of an embassy, therefore, it has a cultural center. It's called the American Institute, and the director of the American Institute there is ambassador level. He represents the United States in Taiwan. The Chinese government is adamant that the United States does not move any closer towards forming diplomatic relations. And whenever there is a visit there, for example, Speaker of the House Pelosi, when she was Speaker of the House, she visited there. Kevin McCarthy hosted the president in California just maybe 2 months ago. So these kinds of developments of what looks like diplomatic give and take is really angrily evaluated by the Chinese government. It looks like the United States is moving a little bit further down that path to establishing what could more likely be diplomatic relations. So for the American Institute, that is the United States presence in Taiwan. For the Taiwanese presence in the United States, that is called the Taiwan American Institute of Culture, Economic and Cultural Representation, and that's in Washington D.C. And any fostering of this relationship really kind of disturbs the waters, and there's been a step change just this last week that I want to talk to you about. It is they signed a deal, the United States and Taiwan, on 21st trade in the United States Taiwanese trade for the 21st century initiative, and that was signed this last week, talking about customs streamlining, improved regulatory proceedings, anti-corruption. And it just really angered Beijing. They came out very strongly against that. It is once again this step forward, and it is possible that the United States could establish diplomatic relationships or diplomatic relations with Taiwan, actually recognizing them as an independent country. That would be a big, huge deal. It would probably ignite direct confrontation. I think the strategy for China, they don't need to actually invade the country because there is a certain component of Taiwanese who want to be reunited with Japan, with China. So there is this current and this fight between those people who want to be distant from China and those who want to reunite. So there's still a internal battle that's going on there. But what the United States is doing to foster this relationship, to make it stronger, is an unsettling development as far as China is concerned, but is one of those things that just continues in lockstep with this growing tension in the region. So it's something that I want to report to you. The Diet, moving on to other things, the Diet approved, we've talked about this before, approved the existence or the extension of life for nuclear plants in Japan from 40 to 60 years. So that passed the Diet. It is a part of the Green Transformation Law. The Green Transformation Law was passed on Wednesday. It passed the upper house. And it passed with a coalition of Komeito, the Democratic People's Party, and Ishin. So they formed a coalition. They passed the law into the upper house, and this means that sorry, I lost my thought. The green transformation law, that carbon credits will be going into effect this time next year, in April of next year. They've done an analysis that confirms what everybody already knows. 88.7% of Japan's energy needs come from overseas. It is not self-sufficient in energy, obviously. So this green transformation law that was passed also deals with renewables, with wind generation, with nuclear extension of life, and also new technologies. So that law was passed. It was very controversial. It is going into effect in a year, and it's something that more reports will be coming out on what the impact is, what the business opportunities are, and what kinds of economic impact it's going to have on shutting down the provision of electricity during the hot summer months and also during the cold winter months. So that is coming up. In different news, it's not exactly political news, but Japan won a Best Actor award in Cannes this year. Koji Yakusho won the Best Actor for his performance in Perfect Days. This is a great boost in the arm. I mean, there are a lot of things that are going on that are rather worrying, but there are some things that are going on that are actually very encouraging. The slight diminution in the inflation rate is good news. What's going on with the Nikkei is good news. And the fact that this seasoned actor, you might know him from Tampopo. That was a movie in 2005 about a ramen shop that was looking for the perfect recipe. Tampopo was great. He was a star in that. He also was in Memoirs of a Geisha in 2005 and also Babel in 2006. So it's just great news. He's a lovely actor, and I think it's going to make a great boost to the production of more and more movies in Japan. If you've followed much of what Deborah DeSnow writes about and publishes about the obstacles of foreign companies shooting in Tokyo, they have better luck shooting in Korea or Taiwan than they do in Japan. So Japan has a very poor reputation for film production, but with this new award, maybe this will change. But I think the appetite globally for things that are going on in Japan. This movie, Perfect Days, by the way, is about a Tokyo guy who cleans toilets throughout the city. That is the kind of outlay of the story. He's a single guy, and it's about his interaction with people, his life. And I guess he just pulled off a sterling performance. I haven't seen the movie yet, but it's one of those things that we should continue to keep our eye on. You know, for the United States, the movie production and the movie industry is a huge boost. It's a huge cultural machine for promoting American culture throughout the world, American music, fashion, that sort of thing. And it's very likely that this could take off more in Japan. I think Tokyo as a site for venues would be just terrific, in spite of the fact that they have a very poor reputation. The Nikkei, by the way, is surging. I think you couldn't miss this. We've been talking about it for the last couple of weeks. They've had their best month in 33 years just this last month. The numbers are in. They had their best month. The Nikkei is surging. Since January, they have pumped in $518 billion US dollars into the stock market here. That's just since January. It is going to be about 18% greater this year. And just this over the last month, it increased 7%, the Nikkei did. So it's a huge boon to the stock market for promoting Japan as a place to invest, to purchase stocks of companies that are doing business here. And the explanation is that the investment environment elsewhere in Asia is not very good. People are leaving China. The Japan stock market is quantitatively bigger than what's going on in South Korea, and the performance is not as great. The stock market in Japan is the best performing stock market in Asia these days, and so it's pulling a lot of money. You've read about Berkshire Hathaway's CEO, Warren Buffett, his advancing, increasing shareholdings in Japan market over the last 3 months has hit the news too. He's very bearish on it. But Japan will definitely be improved as a consequence of this. And the reasons for having all of this foreign money flow into Japan, and also the Japanese investing more in stocks. Actually, the foreigners are the highest percentage investors in the Japanese stock market. But undoubtedly, Japan will have a 1%, at least a 1% GDP growth this year. It is the best performance in Asia, so it's sucking in money from Southeast Asia as well as elsewhere. The shareholder returns due to changes in the corporate governance law has meant that the companies can't hoard the money as much. They need to distribute it to their shareholders. So that means that the shareholders get a little bit more of action on their return on investment. And that has been increasing over the last 2 years. And then also just because of what we talk about here every week is the geopolitical tensions that are racking this region. Japan is kind of the real star that's shining, at least at this point in time. So it's something that we want to look out for. And what's going on in South Korea, what's going on with South Korea and Japan, the United States, what's going on in North Korea, what's going on in Taiwan, are all issues that impact that. And it's critically important that we talk about that and examine it. So let me get back to Japanese politics, what's going on with Mr. Kishida after telling you about all of these things that are going on in very brief snippets. So you might have followed that the prime minister fired his son on Thursday. His son is one of 7 diet secretaries or secretaries that facilitate the prime minister's schedule. Shotaro is his oldest son. He was working in his father's diet office and was hired to come to the prime minister's office as his personal aide, one of 7. He actually had to move a seasoned secretary off in order to put his son in. That caused a little bit of consternation when this happened around January. Then the prime minister took his whirlwind trip. He went to 6 countries in Europe, United States, and Canada. That was a big trip just before the upper house elections. And his son was sent on various errands as they were in Paris and Washington, D.C. He took a car, an embassy car, probably another staffer, went around to pick up some souvenirs, as one usually does when they journey, typically what Japanese people do. And they bring souvenirs for those people who didn't go with them, but when they come back from their trip, they give them a little gift. So that was one of the things he was tasked for. And it was characterized as his being off the schedule and visiting the town and just carousing around. So he came and received a lot of unfair criticism for that. But what happened this last week, as reported in Bunshun, was a family party. As you know, the prime minister can live, if he wishes to, in the prime minister's residence that is in the compound that houses the prime minister's office. It is a brick building. It was designed by Frank Lloyd Wright. It is originally the office that the prime minister ran all of his official duties out of. They've since built a huge prime minister's office there, and they've picked up and moved this Frank Lloyd Wright building to another part on the compound. And when the prime minister has a new cabinet and they all line up on the stairs, that's inside that building. When the prime minister gives a press briefing, or maybe the chief cabinet secretary makes a briefing there are 2 briefing rooms. One of those is in the prime minister's residence. And you can tell just by the background and the brickwork there. But the prime minister can live there, and Mr. Kishida has decided to live there. Mr. Suga did not live there. Mr. Abe did not live there. But Mr. Kishida has decided to live there. And so it's unclear to me that his son also lives there. I kind of doubt it. But still, the prime minister lives there, and they have family dinners. They do, family parties. So in December, the son had a party, or hosted a party, for members of the Kishida family and friends. So they had a party there. And as usual, they're eating and drinking and taking selfies. And some of these individuals, and his son too, took pictures in the areas that is used particularly for promotional purposes of the prime minister. And these came out. Bunshun reported those. So for the last 6 months, there was nothing said about it. But at this particularly pregnant point in time, somebody wanted to attack the prime minister and, show how inappropriate he is, or his selection of his son was nepotism and he's not fit to be a prime minister. So this building up of criticism when there was silence beforehand is one of those things that you look for. These scandals that come up just prior to the prime minister potentially making a decision is a real bellwether for what is coming down the path in very close order. So, like I said, we've got 2 weeks left in this current diet session. It ends on June 21st. And one of the scenarios is that the prime minister will call a snap election just towards the end of that. So we are really brushing up against that. And the fact that his son was picked out as a target of criticism, the prime minister just immediately, it came out in Bunshun on Thursday. The digital version reported it on Wednesday. The prime minister immediately fired his son Thursday morning. He's being replaced by another diet secretary. And Shotaro will go back to the diet office of the prime minister and continue his work there. But it's in the whole context of thing, it's not a big deal that he and his friends took selfies of themselves. But it is a point of criticism if you want to attack the prime minister. Some people will vote for you either way. Some people are sitting on the fence and they're just looking for a reason to dislike you. And something like this, the nepotism complaint, the fact that he's, drinking and then carousing around the prime minister's office, some people are not going to like that as being inappropriate. So to snip it in the bud, he fired his son immediately. So that does, I think, send some signals about where we perhaps are going. The approval rating of the prime minister, as you remember, and on the heels of Hiroshima, was very high. Hiroshima was 2 weeks ago. He went into maybe 52, 53% approval rating. And since then, the afterglow has kind of dimmed very quickly. He's now at around 47, maybe 43%. And part of that is attributed to the fact that his son was, pictured in uncompromising positions, not really uncompromising, but to maybe a certain portion of the population, uncompromising, have laying down on the stairs or shooting a peace sign from the podium, not him, but visitors or guests or even family members. My view is, the prime minister lives there. These kinds of things happen from time to time anyway. His son is having a dinner party that the prime minister showed up at. It didn't interrupt any official duties. It's just kids having fun at dad's house. But it does have an impact on the prime minister's approval rating now, whether totally or somewhat attributed to this new brouhaha. Is it at 47, 43%, depending on how you look at it. And so if the prime minister is going to call an election, he wants his approval rating to be over 50%. He cannot bear to lose seats in the diet if he holds a snap election and the number of LDP seats or the number of Komeito seats is less than when it went into it. People would, Komeito and LDP, he's got enemies in the LDP as well, people who would like him to move on, will rightly criticize him. Why in the hell did you do that? We had, 260 members beforehand, and now we have 240, and that's your fault because you called it wrong. The winds of change were not in your favor. And now we've got Ishin, who is really vying for power, and that's a bigger headache for us. And we're wondering if you're really fit to be prime minister for the next 10 months, or September, that'd be 15 months or so. So this is a big deal. And it's not the only thing that's going on to give the prime minister a headache. Komeito and LDP also are in a bit of a fight. We talked about it last week. The issue is 10-10 that I think everybody understands somewhat. We've talked about it before. There are 10 seats, diet seats. They're not going to change the number of seats in the diet, but because of the population densities in the rural areas, which is decreasing, and the kids and families are moving to the population centers, they're removing some of the diet seats, the lower house seats, from the rural areas and packing them into the higher density areas. For example, Tokyo, Chiba, Nagoya. So 5 seats will be distributed into the 28 districts of Tokyo. Tokyo has 28 districts, and there are members of the lower house that come from each of these districts. And now they're having 5 more diet members in Tokyo, and Komeito wants at least 2 of those, and it wants those without LDP muscling in on them. That means they want at least 2 of these seats to be non-contested by the LDP. That enhances their potential for winning those seats. It doesn't guarantee it, but at least enhances it. And as they've usually decided, when there is, so there are more seats available than the Komeito can provide candidates for. So they make an agreement that in those districts that they can't provide a candidate, we, Komeito, even though we're a different party, but we're in a coalition, we don't have a candidate, so we'll just pretend that you are our candidate of choice in those other districts. But in exchange for that, we want the LDP members to vote for us, or maybe even just the hierarchy within the LDP, don't put a candidate in this district here. And it has gone on for 20 years like that, scratching of the back, being reluctant to put a candidate even in a viable House race, so that the Komeito party can continue and keep, what their numbers are, at least on parity. So they're the new diet seats conflict with what Mr. Hagiura, who is the policy affairs chief, probably in the hierarchy, you've got the prime minister, the president of the LDP, you've got the speaker of the House, you've got the LDP has 3 chief positions. One of those is the Director General, Mr. Motegi, and policy affairs, and a couple of other key people. So Mr. Hagiura holds the regulatory affairs position. He comes from the Abe faction, and it's his job to kind of make things nice with Komeito and the LDP. And the reason why it's somewhat his responsibility is because after Mr. Abe, after Mr. Suga, the relationship between the LDP and Komeito is rather thin. It was very strong under the leadership of Nikai-san, but Nikai is not in the LDP position that he did hold. Mr. Hagiura holds that now. And the problem here is that in the new seat that is being created in Tokyo 28, Komeito wanted their candidate to go there unopposed. But Mr. Hagiura has a very good friend who lost in his last election, who he wants to put in that seat because he feels like he will win in that seat come this next time, especially with Mr. Hagiura's endorsement. The Komeito has said, we don't want that. We don't want him running here. We want that new seat, and we want it to be dedicated to us. We want your agreement there. And if you don't do that throughout all of Tokyo, in fact, throughout the entire country, we're not going to support you. And this is a threat that has real teeth to it, because, as you know, if you've been listening to this briefing, the difference between winners and losers in lower house seats is 0.0 some number percent. So it is very, very small. Sometimes these seats are won by a margin of 800 votes. So it is very hotly contested. And the fact that the LDP is winning is only by a wing and a prayer. They could lose very quickly if they say something inappropriate while they're stumping, if their son is eating pizza and chewing with his mouth open, if something goes on politically, they can lose that sense. The floating vote is very fickle. And I think if the prime minister holds his vote today, the LDP would lose maybe 50 or 60 members of the lower house. And we don't even know how many seats will be lost by Komeito. So the fact that Komeito is holding firm on this, and Mr. Hagiura has not agreed to that. So he still wants his friend, I believe his name is Ando, to run in the 28th district. So he kind of gave a finger to Komeito, and now Komeito said, fine, we're not going to support you within the 28 districts of Tokyo. We'll support you in some other areas because you're going to give us some seats there. But with Tokyo, we're really pissed off. You should have accounted for our preference here. You're not because of Mr. Hagiura, so we're really pissed off. So this whole fight started really in earnest this last week. And so what the repercussions are here, and it's pretty important, is that the Abe faction still has not selected its leader. There are basically 4 people who are contending for the leadership. And whoever is ultimately selected as the leader of the Abe faction will definitely be candidate for prime minister. The Abe faction is the largest by far of all of the factions. And when there is an election for prime minister, the Abe faction will promote their own candidate. They didn't do it last time because they didn't have a candidate under Mr. Abe. They supported another candidate, another independent candidate. But had they put their foot down and come up with a candidate that the Abe faction supported, that person would have become prime minister. So we all know that now. So the fact that Mr. Hagiura is in this fight with Komeito and has kind of damaged that relationship means that of the 4 people, he was one of the 4. He has now fallen out. He is no longer considered a viable candidate to lead the former Abe faction. It's still known as the Abe faction, as their leader. So that's a dramatic thing that has happened recently. He's still going to fight and scratch and try and reestablish himself. I don't know if he's going to be able to, because this fight between Komeito and the LDP is really, really tight. You might remember the figures that the LDP has 262 members of the lower house. There are 465 members. The LDP has 262. With the addition of Komeito's 32, they do have a majority, but it's not a supermajority. So this is a worrying issue for the prime minister and also for the LDP. This is supposed to be Mr. Hagiura's job on distributing who's going to be running where, and also the relationship with their coalition partners. So, with Ishin coming up, Ishin wants to be the opposition party. That is their strategy, not to be in a coalition to have more seats than Komeito and be more of an attractive coalition partner than Komeito, which they could do. That's not their strategy. Their strategy is, first of all, let's be the largest opposition party, and then maybe we challenge the LDP for power. So that is their strategy. Mr. Baba, who is the leader of the Ishin no Kai, has said it's going to take us 10 years, 2 to 3 elections to get to that position. But that is definitely where they're going with this. So 1010 adds 5 new seats to Tokyo. The distribution between those 5 seats between the LDP and Komeito is now an open fight. They're going to be fighting over that rather than distributing who it's going to be. And the LDP could lose seats without the Komeito support. Komeito's vote really means that some LDP members get to be in the lower house. And so they owe the Komeito not only the cabinet position that it always gets as a consequence of being in the coalition government, but also that they owe their seat to the effort that Komeito voters gave them. And when people ask, what's this distinction between Komeito and the LDP? Why are in this coalition party? And how come they're not more firmly attached at the hip? And one of those reasons is that the LDP doesn't acknowledge the Soka Gakkai dates of importance in their calendar. So Soka Gakkai is the Buddhist religious organization, lay organization, and their political arm, kind of wink and nod, is Komeito. It is a political arm of this Buddhist sect. And they wish that the LDP acknowledged on their calendar also some of the critical dates with that Sokakakai observes. And since they don't, there's a little bit of tension there. You're just using us for our votes, and it's a kind of here today, although it's been going on for 20 years, here today, gone tomorrow kind of relationship. So that prospect of here today, gone tomorrow is beginning to rear its ugly head. And so a lot is in store for there. And it also impacts on, the Abe faction. Is the Abe faction good to go? Are we going to have a leader selected soon? It's been a long time. It's been more than a year since the prime minister was assassinated. So there are a lot of eyes on that. This fight is not done yet. We're going to continue to report on it. The Diet will be in session for 2 more briefings. So we'll have a briefing next Sunday, and then the Sunday after that, we'll be approaching the end of the Diet session. We'll know a hell of a lot more after that. So when it comes to, Langley, tell me what the prospects are for a snap election. I think there will be a snap election before the race for prime minister in September of 2024. I'm kind of on the fence, leaning more towards the earlier dissolution of the cabinet rather than later. And let me walk you through the 3 scenarios that are more likely. The first scenario is that the prime minister closes down the House, maybe on the 21st, the last day of this session. And then the 10 days for election campaigning starts. And then outside of the Diet session, there's a campaign, there's an election, there is a selection of new members of the lower house. There is an extraordinary Diet session that is held to welcome these people in and to name a new cabinet. And then it closes down for summer recess. That's the first scenario. I give that one pretty high marks. 80% of the people polled said they don't want to have an election during the Diet session, but it doesn't include the 21st. So they just don't want the Diet machinery to be jammed up by selfish interests by maybe the LDP or by Mr. Kishida personally to enhance his position as prime minister. They want it, if you're going to do that, do it off the schedule. So I think the prime minister is watching that closely, and I think he would be encouraged. I think he wants to have a snap election, and that's why he fired his son so quickly, and that's why he had this meeting about child rearing and helping people consider having more children, because the government gives you so much money for education, for child services, and that sort of thing. So 3.5 trillion per year for the next 3 years is pretty hefty. It's curious, how he's going to pay for it, but also, I mean, that's almost as great as the defense spending that is going to be enhanced. So there's a lot that can be done with that. I don't know if it's going to encourage people to have more children or not, but apparently he does. The real wonder is who's going to be paying for that. So the second scenario is that the prime minister would wait until the fall of this year. That's September, October, maybe November. And the Diet would be in session to close out the year. So he could do it then because the Diet will be in session. But there's just so much that can happen between now and then. And in any event, the prime minister dearly wants to change his cabinet. He doesn't want to have Mr. Motegi any longer as the Secretary General. There's a little bit of a rift going on there. Mr. Motegi's faction is a bit larger than Mr. Kishida's faction, and he's definitely looking at that prime minister's seat. And as soon as there's something that goes on, you can be sure that even though he is in the cabinet, somehow he will be able to influence the fact that there's a little bit of tiresomeness with the current prime minister, and it wouldn't be better if we changed prime ministers. So there's that going on. So he wants to eliminate that threat as quickly as possible. He could wait until the fall to have his snap election, but I think whether he does that or not, between now and that date, he will change his cabinet. He will have a cabinet reshuffle, hopefully to boost his image, and then maybe prepare him for a snap election in the fall. The problem with that scenario is that whenever you change your cabinet, you put new people in, they're not too very good on running due diligence or vetting candidates. Usually there's a pecking order that people deserve to have a cabinet portfolio before they retire, and there's a long list of people that need that. And so sometimes once they become a cabinet official, a member of the cabinet, then they have greater enemies, or some of the enemies that they've already had finally find an opportunity to attack them or attack the prime minister through attacking them. So it really opens up a new ball of wax, and it's not it's a delicate and dicey scenario. So fall looks like it could happen, but there's a lot that can happen negative between now and then. For example, who's going to pay for the 3.5 trillion in child rearing? Is that going to be a tax? And if it's going to be a tax, then the people are going to hate you, and they're not going to vote for you if you wait into the fall. If you have the election before you determine how that's going to be paid for, then people might like you a little bit more. And then the final scenario is, yes, Maya, I'm getting ready to wrap up. The third scenario is that he waits until the presidential election in 2024 in September. So he might do it during the summer months when the Diet is in session, or maybe just a little bit before that, and have an election, a snap election for the lower house. And then he wins great. The LDP does well. He's applauded for his leadership and his political acumen, and his 4-year term comes up and they vote him back into office. So that's the other scenario that he could be looking at. And let me see. Once again, we talked about the Nikkei surging and North Korea's failed spy rocket launch. There's going to be more action that we can anticipate on that in the coming weeks, I believe, and we will continue to report on that. Maya, that about does it for me today. I hope I've touched on all the hot points. If there are other issues that we want to cover, let's go into it in the Q&A, and people can ask their questions directly, and we can kind of chew on those. You will turn on your microphone, I'm sure, one of these days.
One of these days, indeed.
I
Thank
rarely
you.
catch you, but boy, I love it when I do.
Right, indeed. Okay, apologies for this. We do have several questions on different platforms. One of them, I'll start with the question on LinkedIn first. So that's from Seiichiro Manabe-san. And he's asking about, okay, just a moment. All right. Oh, okay, here we go.
Is your cat in there with you? Is she still distracting you?
No, she left.
Okay.
I think she left. She's a free soul, she can move around the house as much as she wants. Yes. So the question isn't it more effective for local election related to vote force of Soka Gakkai? Maybe then the pressure from local organizations will affect the Diet election.
Say that again. I didn't catch the first part.
Okay. So isn't it more effective for the local elections to have a vote force for Soka Gakkai? I have a little bit of trouble understanding this one, but I don't know whether you can interpret it somehow.
Yeah, I'm not sure I quite catch it. Manabe-san, if you can come up and maybe verbalize that a little bit better. But we just finished the local elections. Komeito did relatively well. LDP did okay. Komeito, LDP are okay in these local elections. The LDP did well because of the 5 Diet seats. They got 4 of them. And Ishin did incredibly well. But I don't think that's what Manabe-san is talking about. I think he's talking about nationally.
Yes,
The
I think
Soka Gakkai and the Komeito are strongly entrenched in certain pockets, but not in all pockets. So I think his question is, isn't it a better deal for Komeito to coalesce their forces in order to enhance, their electability? I don't know,
Yes,
but
probably that's. Mm.
but
Okay,
there are
so
some people that
Manabe-san,
vote LDP because there's nobody quite like LDP, and
mm,
they won't vote for Komeito because Komeito is not quite like LDP, but they are in a coalition government. I think if you're going to vote for somebody that's kind of like LDP, but not Komeito and not the communists, of course, it's the Democratic People's Party or it's Ishin. And that familiarity, that resonance on policy grounds, appeals to some people that ordinarily would just vote for LDP because there's nobody else around. But I think we're moving to a two-party system that one is going to be the LDP, the other is going to be Ishin, or an Ishin-like coalition that could include Ishin, Democratic People's Party, or less likely Ishin and the Constitutional Democratic Party.
Right. Okay. Thank you for that. And then there is another question which I will try to make it as easily understandable for you as possible. So, how was the session about Japanese Defense Force and increasing the defense budget in the Shangri-La Hotel? I guess this is probably one of the sessions during the summit, the G7 summit.
No, Shangri-La is separate from that.
One? I'm sorry for that. Yeah.
And Shangri-La, I don't think they've had Shangri-La yet. The Prime Minister attended Shangri-La last year.
Okay. Sorry. Yeah.
So yes, it's a big deal. Maybe the question is referring to what happened several months ago in the Shangri-La summit, but I'm not quite sure.
Right. Okay. So if we get more details about these questions, then I'll read them out to you. And well, there are a couple of questions actually on YouTube from Hiroaki, who is there.
Hiroaki should run for Prime Minister.
Yes, definitely so. Okay. One of the questions is, does Prime Minister Kishida have a growth plan for the coming lower house election?
A growth plan. That means, does he have a plan for expanding the number of seats? Absolutely. That's what he's losing sleep over. That's why he fired his son. So the prospects of the LDP, had he called a snap election, so we've been talking about it for months. When is he going to do it? The timing is right now. Is he going to do it before G7? That would be a good idea. G7 came and passed. Should he do it right now when the numbers are really hot? No, he's not going to do that. He needs to do it a little bit later. He's been thinking about that a lot, and so has his cabinet and the LDP. You know, Mr. Motegi is really in charge of that. Also, Mr. Hagiura. So when that election is going to be called, it does depend on the prime minister for calling that, but it is in a constellation with a lot of other things that are going on. But if he had called it, I think even including today, the LDP would lose seats and Komeito would lose seats. I think the analysis there is clear. So he's waiting for this gust of air to come up, and he's reaching for straws. They might be real straws, but you know, the fact that he had this huge meeting on child rearing, and he's going to give, you know, 3.5 trillion over the next 3 years. 3.5 trillion is a lot of money, and hopefully it makes people want to have babies. I don't know, but he has that plan. And the reason why he has that plan is because people are more likely to vote for him because he's pumping money into the economy. His performance at Hiroshima and the summit there is still in people's minds. So sooner rather than later, because as we've seen from his poll numbers, he was 53, he's now 47, 48, maybe even 43%. He's breached that 50% number, and now he's kind of negative territory. That's not a good time, especially if the trajectory is going down, to call for an election. So if he called for election and the LDP ends up with fewer seats and Komeito ends up with fewer seats, I think there would be a call for no confidence.
Right, but it also means that he needs to find something, well, let's say following wind, something just to get his sales inflated and so on in the economy. But it doesn't seem to, I guess that the G7 summit was one of these things, right? Because
also the Nikkei, the performance of the Nikkei, Maya, that could be attributed to his performance and the stability of the government and the attractiveness of Japan as an economic model and as an investment vehicle. It could be, that diplomatically and globally, he is seen as a leader, and that chip production and high tech is moving back into Japan. China just took over Japan as the world's largest exporter of vehicles. That used to be Japan's crown crown jeweled achievement. And the automobile industry, although it's a tiny component of the economy here, it produces the vast majority of revenue that comes into the country. So they're a powerful force. And so there are dynamics that are going on. But I think it's, and I mean, if you've walked outside just yesterday after the typhoon, it was predicted to be a little bit wet, maybe a little bit damp, but the city was full of people, and you can't walk anywhere without seeing busloads of foreigners. People are driving,
Yeah.
coming in droves to visit Japan, and it's not just the people who are visiting, but it's also the number of foreigners who have been sent here, who are living here, who are establishing a base here, bringing their kids. It is remarkable what's going on. So I think that's also a sign of good prosperity, and it's not the kind of gust of wind that the prime minister wants, because the foreigners don't vote, but it is a barometer of how other things are going.
Right. Well, that's a good point, I believe. And still, we don't know because I'm sure that not many Japanese, actually, not many seniors follow Nikkei. And the question is how, because we know that the main part of the population who votes for LDP, the LDP is basically the seniors here. So,
Right.
yes, that's another dynamic which we also need to think about and evaluate as well. But
Yeah. Okay. Let me put a little bit of a cap on that. It is the elders, but it's also the business, big business and corporate vote for the LDP. So they're usually strong in the rural areas because of the subsidies that are given to farming communities and the production of rice. But that's shifting now. 1010 tells us that that's shifting. So some of those seats are being redistributed to the higher population areas. So that's why the new politicians, the younger, the more flashy, the guys that are a little bit with it, are being promoted within the LDP as candidates. And also Ishin is doing that. Ishin is the younger of the parties, and it is coming up with fresh ideas and fresh faces. So it's a real battle.
it is a real battle. Well, moving on to the next question then. What kind of role can Japan play in the upcoming NATO summit in Lithuania? So that's a
Very,
good question, I think, but
very interesting. So the NATO summit, Kishida attended last year. It was, I think, the first time for him to receive a formal invitation. And this year he will also go. And one of the topics of conversation is, I like you guys. You guys like me. You know, we're spending a lot of money on defense. We're spending 2%, just like you guys. We're spending 2% on defense related issues. And, you know, we think we would like to invite you to open a NATO office in Tokyo. How about that? It's not a diplomatic mission, but it is a representative office for NATO, because we're getting so much closer, and we're hosting a lot of your troops and support vessels and your naval, and we're doing joint exercises with the British, with the Australians. You know, there's a lot going on militarily, and all this money that you're going to be spending in Japan makes us really, really good friends, and we actually need you. The Japan Constitution does not allow us to do offensively what you can do. And so let's be better friends. So yes, the NATO summit, the upcoming NATO summit is really critical for the prime minister. It might make some people more angry with him as a war hawk, but he's not typically known as a war hawk. Both him and the foreign minister are not
no,
traditionally
he
viewed
isn't.
as
And I
war
think that
hawks.
there is generally a fear here, not only in Japan, but also in. Oh, sorry. Can you hear me?
Sure.
Yes. Okay, I lost you for a second. And he's not known as war hawk, as you call him, but I think that there is a fear here in Japan, of course, among the older generations, and also I would say in the region as well, that Japan is remilitarizing, and that fear is real actually. So I think that the neighbors of Japan, and also the countries that are not neighboring the country, Japan, but still in this region, they are watching very carefully. And I think that, of course, on the one side, they want to know that there is a force that can actually match China's force in the region and the expansion here. But on the other side, there is the fear here, which is always present. I mean, people still remember what happened in the 30s and the 40s, early
Yes.
40s of the last century.
So that's a really great observation, Maya. Um, Japan is, I don't know if it's appropriate to say unwittingly or um, without voluntary contribution, being closer and more aggressively drawn into this conflict. That's why we talked about this, the TNT export to pack the artillery shells that are going to be used in Ukraine. This, TNT has lots of dual uses. One of them is for artillery shells. And this export, insisted upon or requested by the United States, because they need more of this, begins to scratch up against Article 9. And the visit of Japanese naval warships now going to South Korea, and that has already happened. They're flying under the banner of the rising sun. It is not the typical official flag of Japan. It is the naval flag of Japan, which has the rays sprawling out from the center. And this
Yes.
flag just irritates the hell out of Southeast Asian countries, because that was the flag that colonization was under. But they've gone through that argument. They have accepted the fact that the naval vessels will be flying under that flag. So I think the Asian countries understand the dynamic between China and Taiwan, and they know that somebody has to be strong here. And the United States sure has muscled in, but it is Asia, and Japan is the biggest, the most vibrant, the largest economy here, next to China. But also this thing about having this coalition of like-minded countries to confront Japan, China, in the event of, if I mean, it's obvious, if China wanted to move on Taiwan, they could do it, and they could get it. The argument here is that the repercussions for them doing that are so great. So it's a deterrence effect that I think the United States is trying to build on, that they would lose too much, and that actually the Chinese economy is a little bit teetering, because if the United States and the Western countries stopped the trade with them, they would absolutely collapse. So there's that calculation going on too.
It is indeed. Okay, and then we are going now to Clubhouse, the questions there. Well, the first one is from Mario. So
Hi,
anybody?
Mario.
Okay. Oh, where did it go? Okay. So any budget, do you have any budget information on the plan to harvest 20% of the sugi trees? That's the Japanese.
Yes.
So supposedly, is it okay? It will be subsidized, supposedly.
Yeah. So for those of you who haven't heard this news, it really is great news for those people who suffer from hay fever, because it comes in with a punch in early spring, when the cypress trees begin to bud and produce pollen. And it's first the cypress trees. And what's the tree that happens right after that, Maya? So it's kind of a 1-2 punch. The cypress trees come first, and they flood the entire nation with
They do.
pollen. And what's the next tree that comes out?
I think that the next one is it's once again a coniferous tree, and
It's a conifer, right?
Yes.
So what the Japanese government has
now.
said is, we're going to attack this. We're going to begin to reduce the number of cedar trees in Japan. Wow! If you've ever flown from Tokyo to Sendai, or Tokyo to even Hokkaido, or to Hiroshima, you pass through the mountains. They're all planted with cedar forests, huge cedar forests, hand planted, and they're all producing pollen at the same time. So the Japanese government is saying, let's do something with that. Let's kind of reduce that. And I think that's a great idea. I think there's plenty of use for cedar, and the cedar has been growing for 70, sometimes 80 years, because some of that planting happened before the war, in anticipation of winning the war and then building new houses and restarting the economy. And they needed the trees for that. So they were planted and continue to be planted after the war. And only after they became rather mature and producing pollen did people realize this sucks. This wasn't such a great idea. So the other idea that's come up recently, this is a little bit tongue in cheek, that the Japanese have a private company that attempted to land a vehicle on the moon just recently, right?
Oh yes.
And
Yes.
and they failed just because they ran out of fuel just at the last final minutes, and the vehicle crashed. But there is
All right.
another idea coming up that they're going to build a satellite using wood. So,
Really?
so maybe
How
this
is
is the
that?
idea that the 20% that they're going to reduce, they're going to be building satellites out of wood. Once again, that's somewhat tongue in cheek, but it is an interesting concept that they're going to be building components of the satellite from wood. But what Mario is asking more specifically is this idea of reducing the trees, and I think that's easily done. It's probably self-sustaining and a part of the green transformation, the law that they just passed. And what they would do is they would just say, look, if you want to cull the trees, you can do it. You don't have to pay a fee, or just take what you want and then produce, the lumber. And I think there would be a huge industry that would be initiated as a consequence of that. Plus, the government could be charging money for that as well. So I don't think it would cost the Japanese government money to reduce that. I think they would just open it to public bidding, and sawmills and construction companies, they would come up with different ideas on how to use wood more fruitfully throughout the economy. I think it's a good idea. Wood is beautiful. It's a great substance, and they have enough of it. They just don't have a market for it.
They don't have a market. And I think that, a couple of months ago, actually, Mario and I exchanged messages about the difficulty of executing this plan, maybe probably increasing the number of trees that will be, let's say, cut down, because a lot of the forests here are privately owned, and it makes it really difficult for the government to move forward at a faster pace, and so on. And on the other side, people are moving to the cities, right? And those trees, they cannot be used at the same rate for houses, for example, in the countryside or in the cities, at the same rate as they were in the past. So it's really a difficult, a complex problem to solve, I believe.
Yeah. Well, I think Japan is looking for ideas on creating new industries and doing things a little bit differently than they have in the past. They need to get out of the doldrums, this 30-year doldrums where wages haven't increased, the economy hasn't really picked itself up. It used to be, during the bubble years, Japan was feared all over the world for how much, their economy was just on afterburners. They really want to get back to that. There are a couple of ways they could do that, and I think this idea with the trees and the lumber might be one. And also, people haven't talked about it much, but also the hemp industry. Hemp is illegal. You can grow it here under certain restrictions, but the industry itself, hemp is just it produces lots of byproducts for paper, for clothing, for lots of materials. But since it's restricted, it's an industry that could start up and produce a lot of different new products. But I think people are just worried about the, people smoking hemp, and that's the reason why it's kept down.
Yes, so we have Mario up on stage with us in Clubhouse.
Great.
And also, Mario, welcome. Just if you allow me to
good
read...
morning.
Good morning. Could you please allow me to read the comment from David, because it's related to the topic of lumber and sugi trees here in Japan. So David wrote, a little known fact, the LNG tanker ships that have huge spherical tanks are often partially made of wood because it has excellent structural properties across a wide range of temperatures, such as durability and flexibility. So maybe that's one way, since we're talking about LNG as a green alternative to coal and other fossil fuels. So maybe that's one of the ways, to use all those cedar trees here in Japan. Who knows? Well, Mario, thank you for letting me read this out. Welcome, and thank you for coming up on stage.
Yes, thank you very much for getting me up the stage, and thank you very much for your meetings every Sunday. Appreciate it. I slightly disagree with the comments of Timothy regarding the cedar trees and the subsidies. So, as you know, I happen to be in the chainsaw industry for
That's
quite a long
right. Yeah.
time. And there were already subsidies several years ago in order to cut cedar trees. So they paid the loggers a subsidy if they cut a certain amount of trees, which they did, and they just left it in the forest. So they didn't pull it out. And then they realized that this is not going to work out. So they made a kind of kaizen to this subsidy. They said, well, if you get a subsidy, if you cut the cedar, and if you pull it out of the forest. So what the people then did, they cut it, they pulled it out of the forest, and they left it there. So actually, there's plenty of cedar lying around in the forest. And I really wonder how they will try to get the people to cut the cedar trees. And they are overdue to be harvested. And that's the reason for the huge hay fever problem we have here. With 80 years, these trees are too old. So there should be a plan how they spend money to get the loggers to harvest the sugi.
Yes, definitely. I don't know whether there is a plan actually, because they have decided to do it. Sometimes it happens that the plans come after a decision is being made. But Timothy, do you have any insights on this?
This was the reason for my question,
Yes.
whether Timothy eventually knows that there are some budget plans for this project.
No, I don't. And I didn't know the background that they tried this with the subsidy and they just left the felled trees to be where they were. That's just, that's a waste of resources. But what it tells you is that there's not the demand for the lumber. I mean, cedar's a beautiful tree, a beautiful wood. It's used in construction and all sorts of things. But that tells you that there's not the demand there to take the logs, truck them in to the sawmill and make them into usable lumber. That's kind of surprising to me.
Well, you have to know that about 97% of the forest is owned by private persons or companies, and it's not by the government. So if you take this in comparison to Germany, where you have 65% of the forest being owned by the government or by the country. And in Germany, you have a huge infrastructure of forest streets or forest logging ways, which you don't have in Japan. So the people, as it's not economical for them to harvest the trees. They don't invest into infrastructure to get the trees out of the forest. So this is it's not just a problem to cut the trees, but also to how to use the tree economically.
Indeed. Yes, it is.
Well, look, Mario, thanks for that comment. I will look into it now that you've put it on the schedule and report on it a little bit deeper next week about what subsidies, how they plan to do that. 30%, what was it, 20%? That's a lot. 20% is a lot. So there has to be an idea behind that. So let me take a closer look into that and report to you later.
Thank you very much.
Thanks for your input.
Thank you, Mario. Then we'll move on, to the next question, which is from Bruce. Well, it is, can you reflect on regional variances of birth rates across Japan? Down here in Shonan, this is the Venice Beach of Japan, a fairly well-off region. Families of 3+ children are not uncommon. Seems to me they are pitching in, but also have the income to support starting a family.
Yeah, the regional differences, that's another one that I can put on the schedule for next week. There are a lot of regional differences, and I'll take a look at that because it is an interesting point. I think what you're going to find is, for the affluent and for the well-off, and particularly in the resort areas, the people who live there might be more inclined to have, because in Okinawa has the highest birth rate, and it's basically a tropical island. It is also the prefecture with the lowest economic output. The salaries are lower there than anywhere else. So
Mm.
it is kind of somewhat of a depressed market. We used to talk about it quite a bit when Danny Tamaki, the governor, was going through his election and talking about enhancing Okinawa as a resort area or as a university location, and the fact that the economy there is artificially kept down by the central government because there's this tension between what the Okinawa government wants to do and what the national government wants to do with regard to the bases of the American military forces. But a little bit of a different issue. But let me get into that next week, Maya.
Yeah, thank you.
Great question, Bruce. Thanks.
Yes, thank you for that. Okay, Bruce, be with us next week again. Yes. And well, from Ted this morning, thank you for today's excellent analysis, which has helped me understand these dynamics better. The question is, will you please explain what Ishin's main message is and what their appeal has been to Japanese voters? Also, what can you tell us about Representative Baba's background and career?
How about that?
Yes.
I always get afraid
Okay.
when Ted comes on stage and asks a question because I just know he already knows the answer. I mean,
Yes.
this is kind of Ted's bread and butter too. So I always appreciate it. And let me see what I can do about addressing that. The appeal for Ishin, as you know, is it's not LDP. As long as it's kind of like in the United States, as long as it's not President Trump, anybody's okay. And for some voters, as long as it's not the LDP, I hate the LDP. They're just money grubbers. They're just big business. They don't care about the little guy. I remember I had one of my friends who was an LDP member, and then look at all the things that he did. And he was in a scandal. So I don't like those guys. So you've got that component and that kind of weight of the reputation of the LDP. They've somewhat changed their tone. They've taken on a lot of the appeal that Komeito had, so they've become a little bit softer. They've become a little bit more family oriented. This push by the prime minister to envelope himself in child rearing and encouraging mothers to have more than one child or 1.2 children, or right now it's 1 point, I think it's 1.26 children. So they've kind of robbed the opposition parties or even their coalition partner of the best ideas that they have that have that softer appeal. But some people just won't vote for the LDP one way or the other. But Ishin provides that kind of new, fresh face. They've come from Osaka, and there's always a chip on the shoulder between people from Osaka and Tokyo, that they love to denigrate those snobs in Tokyo, all toe-dye, and they wear ties, and they think they're so cool. And here in Osaka, we have humor, and we have great food, and we have fist fights, and you guys are just pussies in Tokyo. So you got that kind of thing going on there. And it's a kind of an interesting dynamic, actually, that you've got these two centers of gravity. And Osaka is, it's an economic powerhouse. I think if you just consider Osaka Prefecture itself as an economic entity, it's bigger than most of the countries in Southeast Asia as an economic machine. So it does carry a lot of weight, and it's politically, it is moving up. It now has a majority in the House of Osaka Prefecture. It's got the governorship, and it's got the governorship of the neighboring prefecture as well. So it's quite on a roll. It's won a lot more seats than it was predicted to in the last municipal election. And when it comes up for a snap election, they're going to do extremely well. So about Mr. Baba. So Mr. Baba, I think you probably know this, Ted, but when I worked in the Nakayama office, Mr. Baba was a young kid that worked in the office as well. So he worked under the Nakayama brand as well. We worked on elections together. I think he was just out of college or so. I was probably 32 or 33. So that means he was probably 25 or so. And I'm not sure about his, I don't remember exactly. I don't think he comes from a political family, although his father, I think his father was somewhat of a company guy, wealthy industrialist, or something along those lines. But he's just a regular guy. He's a good guy. It's kind of, for me, it's interesting that he became the leader of Ishin because I knew him and we drank together and, you know, just had so much fun during the election seasons and also in the Nakayama office. There is a memorial for Dr. Nakayama, who died 2.5 months ago. You might have heard. I posted something on that on LinkedIn. And there's a memorial this month of the diet secretaries just for him in Osaka. And I believe I will run into Mr. Baba there because he was a diet secretary too. And probably about 50 of us who worked at one point or another under the Nakayama brand will be gathered there to pay our last respects. So I'll pass on your regards, Ted. I think you probably know him. You know just about everybody that's influential in Japanese politics already.
Yeah, I believe so. Okay, and then there are some comments regarding the defense budget and also the, well, let's say militarization or, the increase of the defense budget in Japan. So by David, that the concerns of Asian neighbors that Japan's defense forces may become too powerful are largely a public relations issue because most Asian countries' militaries are already completely outmatched by the Japanese SDF in terms of fighting capability.
Yes.
Your thoughts? Yes, you agree.
Who was that from?
David.
David, thank you very much. Yeah, you know, that's not the reason why, but I think it's one of the things we should consider. Koji Yakusho won Best Actor at Cannes. And this, you're absolutely right. It's public relations. It would be nice, you know, the Koreans are doing a great job on their boy bands, and they're going all over the world. This brand that they've created, they're doing a really good job. Japan has an opportunity to similarly brand themselves as, it's not just Cool Japan. Cool Japan kind of fell on its face a little bit, but food culture here, you know, tourism, the fashion industry is really hot. But I really would love to see Japan go a little bit more forward on producing movies and producing exportable entertainment content. They do great on manga, but in terms of producing singers or even actors, which is funny enough, you get some of these great actors and they just kind of fall into a loop where they become really famous in a movie or a hit series, and then they fall back into doing commercials and being on these various sitcoms, which is really kind of below their caliber. But most Japanese really have to go overseas in order to get true recognition. But I think Japan is missing out on providing that marketing push. You're absolutely right that, you know, the Japanese need to be more. They're not good at it. I mean, we all know that they're not good at self-promotion and marketing. Some countries are far better at that. But I think Japan has a lot to tout. And they also need to, ingratiate themselves to their Asian neighbors. They've done somewhat of a good job with South Korea because it's meant so much. They've solved this issue with reparations for those victims of the colonial period. I think that issue won't die for another generation or two. But, you know, other nations have suffered as well. And to see this flag flying in the ports, or to see Japan taking another prominent role militarily, is a very scary prospect. But Japan is not what Japan was when they just completed the building of the Diet in 1936. Japan had just defeated Russia in a naval battle in the Tsuruga Straits, something almost unheard of, and it was on a great march for colonization that was being, you know, the tried and true way to get a modern country is by, you know, establishing colonies and then pillaging them for what they had to produce. That's what the United States and the British and the Belgians did. So it was a model that was pursued. But Japan is, and the world is not like that anymore. So I think it is a branding issue. It is a marketing issue. You know, for those of us that are in this briefing, most of us are long-term Japan hands, And we want to see Japan accepted more widely into the world community and to actually take a more dramatic leadership role. Mr. Kishida wants to do that too. At least he's making strides in that diplomatically. But in terms of, economic exchange and cultural exchange, there's a lot to be, done. The prime minister also said he wants, what was the number? Like 10,000 Japanese students a year to be traveling overseas and doing their undergraduate and postgraduate studies. And he wants a similar number.
Yeah, 500,000 or so.
Yeah, 500,000. That's a huge number.
Huge number.
I think a lot of us, that's how we kind of started our relationship with Japan. Is we came here, we got a government grant, maybe we went to undergraduate or we had a homestay or something like that. But I think that is a very effective technique of blending the cultures and making long-term friends. So I think the prime minister sees that too. There's a lot to be hopeful for and to look forward to. It's just that there's a lot of other things going on dynamically that make you worried about, physical conflict and invasion of Taiwan, or maybe the blockade of Taiwan, and trade wars and that sort of thing. So it is very testing.
It is indeed. Going back to the political parties and the opposition here, there is a question from Yoshitaka Tori-san, and the question is: should you think? Okay, maybe okay.
Give it a shot.
Okay, I'll make it a question. So, do you think that Ishin is connecting with the violence mafia?
That's an interesting question. So, to be really accurate about it, there are elements of the mafia, the Yakuza, within the LDP. Okay? So I think just as a general observation, Japanese politics and politics in any country, Japanese politics is a microcosm of the society at large. And if you agree that the Yakuza, the underground economy, controls about 7 or 8% of the economy, that's their impact. It's not very visible, but the pachinko, the gambling, prostitution, the drugs, the running bars, and all of the stuff, you're having money that it's not represented by receipts. It's just this economy. It does have a significant component of how the country works. So within the LDP, there are elements that they've had links to the underworld. They run and they represent quietly them inside the politics, and sometimes it's secret, sometimes people don't know, but it is a fact that there are members of the Yakuza that hold diet seats within the LDP. The question, though, is about Osaka, and Osaka is a hotbed for gangster activities, and it's very well developed. A lot of the families have their home bases there. And so the suggestion is, are they similarly represented? And since Ishin is kind of a new upstart and they're in need of money and they're trying to claw their way up, they might be cutting corners short. I think that's somewhat of an accurate representation, because it is politics after all. Politics needs money and it needs voters. And there are some good aspects of the Yakuza. That's why they've been surviving through so many centuries. Whenever there's a disaster or a community confrontation, they're there in force to solve problems and to help people. But yeah, they are involved in the black market too. So they're the negative aspects, but they're outlawed. You can't go into the bathhouses with a tattoo because it is suggestive of you being a member of the Yakuza. So there are laws against it, and they're looking for legitimate ways to do business. So the fact that they were in a Bosozoku gang and they didn't go to college or they didn't finish high school, and then they got a little bit older and they ran a bar, but they're still kind of, and then they actually become a gang member. Once you become a member of the Yakuza, and there's Yakuza, and then there's just kind of chimpira guys who are just
Okay. Yeah.
acting illegally. But once you are a renowned or a made man, and you are a member, and maybe some of them don't get the tattoos. It's defined that you're going to be the business guy. You're not going to be pursuing. You're not going to be outwardly a yakuza. So no tattoos for you. And when we hang out quietly and that sort of thing. But some of them go full bore. But in either respect, getting out once you're in is extremely difficult. It's called washing your feet. You have to ask permission, and you have to be granted the right. And sometimes, in order to do that, you have to surrender a finger or two to get out. But once you're in for life, and so it's difficult. And if you come from that kind of upbringing, frequently you don't have a master's degree, you don't have a PhD, you don't have the high education, but you've got street smarts, and you still need to earn a living. So if you're not running a company, maybe politics is the best way for you to move forward. So I hope that's somewhat responding to the question. But yeah, it is an interesting aspect of Japanese politics. Ishin is on the up and coming, but it is not a criminal organization. I'm sure they would not endorse anybody from the criminal world joining. And sometimes you have to sign a document. It's like renting a car or renting an apartment. You have to sign a statement that says, I am not connected to any underworld. I'm not affiliated or associating with members of the underground. You have to actually sign that statement. So, but the question and the suggestion is, I think, a valid one. So thanks for asking it. I hope I don't get into trouble for the answer.
I hope so too. Who knows, really? Well, but thank you for answering it. And yes, there is also another comment from Yoshitaka, and it is about Komeito, that they don't really have a strong force, maybe awareness for the or political agenda, actually. So it's more about religious affiliation for them, not so
Right.
much about politics. So your comment on this?
Yeah.
Just
So it's a good observation that Komeito is the political arm of Soka Gakkai. Soka Gakkai is very tight. I mean, this is the organization that says, look, wouldn't it be wonderful if everybody who's single, will you just get married? Okay. So since you've been a member for 10 years or 5 years, or your parents were members, we're going to have a wedding ceremony, and we're going to assign to you who you should get married to. And they do it, and they pull it off, and it's successful. And some of these couples, they survive. I mean, it used to be that the Japanese relied on omiai, that it was an introduced marriage. And many of those arranged marriages do survive until the death of both people. It is a successful way to build a community. Alternatively, like in the West, we don't have omiai. We have, love relationships where you meet somebody, you play tennis with them, you date, you fall in love, you get married, you ask the dad if you can marry his daughter, that kind of thing. Soka Gakkai is kind of in between there. And although there are some stories of bad matchings, that happens in any scenario, but they have been successful in building this community and getting people married. And also people who don't have children, somehow they end up with a child, somebody contributes a child, they get into a little bit of trouble for that. It could be characterized as selling children. So there's a little bit of that. And that was also one of the criticisms with the Unification Church, that they were forcefully telling people, you're going to have a child and you're going to give it to these guys here because they can't have a child and you can. So your first one, give to them, and then you can have another child, and we'll help you and we'll support you. And because we all believe in the same thing. So with Soka Gakkai, they will vote as a block. If the leader or the community leader says, we're going up for the election and this is how we're going to vote, we don't have a candidate from our religious sect, we don't have a candidate in our political party, so we have to vote for the LDP. So you guys do it, okay? And they religiously do what they're told in terms of voting. The problem with Soka Gakkai is that their numbers are beginning to shrink, especially in light of what happened with the Unification Church and the exposure of Soka Gakkai and Komeito. And they are this actualization, this realization. Not everybody, I think, believes it or has realized it, but it is an affiliation that is actually a representation of what the reality is. Alternatively, though, there are people who belong to Komeito because they don't belong in Soka Gakkai, but they believe in the softer, gentler policy positions that are held by Soka Gakkai. For example, a distribution of child care services or retirement services, or some of the precepts that Komeito really strongly stands behind is the development of the family and community services, that sort of thing. So they're terrific because as a block, they vote the way that they are told to vote.
Right. And there is a question on LinkedIn from Julian Smith. It is, does Soka Gakkai have large-scale arranged marriages? Isn't this Unification Church? So I guess, yes, if you can comment on this too.
Yeah,
or...
no, Unification Church is the one that's known for these huge weddings, and it's been going on for 25, 30 years, maybe even longer than that. Soka Gakkai is not so much into the huge weddings, but they are into this kind of omiai, and you come from a good family, and we know somebody from a good family, and they're Soka Gakkai. And Soka Gakkai is also, it's very powerful, it's very strong in the communities that they exist. And in the absence of anything like in the West, where you got the Catholic Church, you've got some of these Christian churches that have been in existence. In Japan, you've got Buddhism, you've got Shinto, and then it tails off. There's not a whole lot of other religious underpinnings that guides Japanese culture or Japanese society. So there is this kind of longing for something to hang your hat onto, to some spiritual other source of life, of spirituality that people want to have. And there aren't that many avenues here. That's why at the end of the war, when the United States and other countries sent their missionaries in, they came in droves. Lots of missionaries came in, and they're still very active. The other religions have established a great presence here in Japan. And I think it's just because there's this historical anchor that religion is kind of looks this way, and it leaves a lot to be desired for many people. So I think that's a large explanation for it, but I stand to be corrected.
Okay, thank you very much for that. So Timothy, it looks like we have gone through all the questions so far, and then there is one thing that we have been talking about for maybe 2 or 3 weeks. That's an event we're going to have on June the 30th, and it's open to registration, of course. It is the event which consists of actually a tour in the Diet, and that tour is going to be guided by the one and only Timothy Langley, of course. And of course, after that, it will be followed by a networking sit-down dinner. So I invite everybody who is interested, who hasn't yet, but wants to meet Timothy in person, and the other members, of course, of the team of Japan Expert Insights. You can join us on that day. We have already published the details on LinkedIn, but we'll continue to do that regularly so that you don't miss the chance to actually register if you're willing to. And then, that's it for today, I think. Timothy, anything else? Yes, go ahead.
Let me just wet your whistle on this Diet tour and on the gathering afterwards. So many people, even those of us who have lived in Japan for a long time, haven't actually been inside the Diet. And this is an opportunity for you to do that. I used to run Diet tours all the time, and I think people should see it. It's just access to get in there. You need to know a thing or two in order just to go into the Diet. But it sure would be helpful if you had somebody like me who's done it hundreds of times to walk you through. And so that's the idea that Maya and I came up with, is let's have an opportunity for people to look at the Diet, go into the chamber, actually, where they take the vote, where the members of the parliament actually assemble, where the emperor comes to open the house, where there is a throne. There is actually a throne in Japan, and it exists inside the parliament. It doesn't exist inside the imperial palace. It only exists inside the Diet. Not many people know that. And also the building of this this tremendous parliament. It took 17 years, and there's just a lot of historical underpinnings there. But the plan is that we're going to walk through the Diet, take about an hour to do that, talk about how laws are made, how policy is chewed on, where the emperor comes in, and how the building was constructed, because that's a pretty essential element of the concept of having a parliament here in Japan, because this was during the Meiji period. And then from there, there's just a little bit of a walk over, and Maya has reserved this beautiful venue for a sit-down dinner with cocktails, and we can sit there and talk about the Diet, and we can get to know each other, network. And I think it's a really great idea. It's on the last day. It's the last Friday of this month.
Last day, yes, the last Friday of June. So it starts in the late afternoon.
Yeah. So I need an hour to kind of walk you through there. So I think we're going to
Timothy,
start.
I think, yes, Friday, the last Friday this month.
Right.
And yes, so it's we're going to actually get together at 3:50 at the starting point. Yes, that's it. I can see Hiroaki. Thank you for asking. Of course, you can join the event. So you need to register, because we have to make reservations both for the Diet and for the networking venue. So yeah, we need that information in advance.
Yeah, and just to put a bow tie on that, if you don't mind, Maya, we need to have the registration, because I've registered to take the tour group through, but I need to have the particulars on everybody to get them into the Diet. So we need that in advance. And if you're bringing any luggage or anything like that, it'll go through a scanner, and so it's a pretty secure tour. It is the House of Parliament. There are a lot of members of the Diet that walk through there, so it's somewhat special. So I do need to have registered details beforehand.
Yes, indeed. Well, thank you very much for that, Timothy, for the details. And
thanks, Hiroaki.
Yes, Hiroaki, thank you very much as well. Thank you, everybody who stayed with us for, well, it's already 2 hours almost.
Wow.
This beautiful Sunday morning. So, of course, you are always welcome to join the discussion, and we hope that you can join the tour as well and the networking event on June the 30th. Well, stay with us. We'll be here once again this Wednesday at 8 o'clock this time. It will be a session with Tim Sullivan and Frank Foley. And then next Sunday again, 8:20 with Timothy Langley, when we're going to have the 122nd episode. And yes, of the Japanese Politics 101. That's all for today, Timothy. You are free to go. You're free to...
Thank you, Maya.
Yes, if you want to. Thank you very much indeed.
Thank you, everybody. Thanks for tuning in. And this is the first time we did the Q&A straight through on the live stream. So please let Maya know if you liked it, you didn't like it, you want to return back to the original format. I think we're good to go either way. We're just trying to respond to what the audience is telling us they like. So thank you very much for tuning in. Thanks, Maya.
Thank you, Timothy. See you next week.
See you next week.
Thank you.